It's so wonderful to see all of you here with us tonight as we celebrate our 20th anniversary. And I hope that this occasion inspires ideas and discussions about how we can make ARIS the great school we are also very proud of. My name is Barbara. Thank you for coming tonight. Just like many things around us, we have a past, a present, and a future. And so does ARIS. And we want to reflect on that this evening. Picture 500 eagles collaborating together. How far do you think they would see? And how effective would they be? This evening, I'd like you to imagine yourself as part of our community, working together to envision our future together and prepare for our future. Ladies and gentlemen, guests of honor, parents, ARIS community, welcome to the 20th anniversary fundraiser cocktail. We will begin with the Ghana National Anthem.
Hello everyone, my name is Renee. Thank you for celebrating the ARIS 20th anniversary with us. I will be singing the National Anthem. God bless our homeland, Ghana, and make our nation great and strong, bold to defend forever the cause of freedom and of right. Fill our hearts with true humility. Make us cherish fearless honesty and help us to resist oppressors with all our will and might forevermore, and help us to resist oppressors with all our will and might forevermore. More. Mojayana nanom shegunya ditu hombayen. Ejumine once so say ya be biatwasu nim bien transon konton kraden ye pese me kominya edi embremu amaya sasu hodo atumse omano serenye omano sebe ayasena hose omafu branetre omano serenye omano sebeyo ayasena hose omafu branetre.
We'll begin our program by welcoming our visionary leader. You know, I feel like ARIS is a place where we are very forward-thinking. We try to look into the future. We come up with strategies. We plan ahead. And there's one lovely lady at the center of all this. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Fatma Al-Daimat.
So, esteemed guests, board members, ladies and gentlemen, dearest ARIS community, welcome to the ARIS 20th fundraising cocktail. Tonight, we come together to celebrate our school, to celebrate our journey, to celebrate with our community. ARIS is 20, and I'm 45. No pressure. But let me confess, I'm quite jealous of this institution. What would I give to be 20 again and young? But maybe that's why I feel so passionate about working in such a young institution. I've been using this opportunity to really reflect on the journey of this school. a journey I was lucky to be part of for 12 years. But what does it really mean to be 20? Well, according to my research, the most important thing we need to be very happy about is that we are no more teenagers. People are starting to take us very seriously. Well, according to a magazine that I used to read when I was a teenager, Cosmopolitan, there are 10 things we only realize when we are no more teenagers. For the sake of time, I'm going to stick to the five of them that I found to be very relevant today. The first one is, it's not the end of the world if we fail. So failure is not the opposite of success. It's actually an integral part of success. If we have learned anything in the past few years, it is that education is too important not to take risks. I repeat again. Education is too important not to take risks. In this fast-changing world, it is impossible to stick to old traditional system that does not prepare our students for the future and does not connect them to the real world. Throughout the years, ARIS has taken the road less traveled and focused on providing inclusive education that meets the needs of our students and their passions. We are the first and only school in Africa to offer all the 4 IB programs and to also include career pathways along with academic courses. We also developed a number of personalized pathways for many of our students in our pursuit of personalized learning. We also did the same for our teachers and worked hard hand in hand with them to develop personalized learning growth plans and pathways into leadership, research, and specialization. This year alone, 40 of our teachers will be graduating with a certificate in teacher and education leadership. And many others have become instructional coaches in blended learning, education technology, and concept-based inquiry. We started migrating all our system into the cloud and moving to blended and digital learning, including digital book, since 2016. We began developing our well-being program then in 2016, when well-being wasn't even a buzzword. Our focus was always a holistic focus on the child and also an inclusive focus on education. We tried a lot of new ways of doing things, and many times we did fail. But we just kept coming back, working hard to improve our approaches and try new strategies to make things better. We learned a lot through these failures, and this is why we're very proud of them. Lesson number 2. It's important we take care of our mental health. As I mentioned before, we began our journey with social and emotional learning in 2016. Today, we have a separate department and a division that takes care of the well-being of our students and staff. We have a separate team, a budget, and Dr. Funke heads a total division on well-being. We have also migrated to develop also a policy on mental health and how we can support our students who go through really intense experiences in mental health. As we move into our 20s, our commitment to well-being and mental health will remain strong and very much necessary. Lesson number 3. Heartbreaks do not get easier. As teenagers, we faced many losses and uncertainties. During COVID alone, we shared the same pains and sorrows as a whole planet. Every year, we sit in this same ballroom and we graduate a new batch of ARIS Eagles who are ready to face the world. And every year, our hearts break and we shed tears of sorrow and joy. When you work in a school, you realize that everything you do is based on relationships. Relationships and connection we develop with our students, colleagues, and parents. Our relationship also extend to beyond the schools, to friends of the schools, partners. And when you are so much focused on relationships, heartbreaks are the norm. They are even necessary. It's only through them that we connect with what it means to be human and what it means to care. So moving on, We know that it's not going to be easier, but I guess we're ready for it. Lesson number 4. It can only get worse. It's in red, sorry. I didn't say it will get worse, but I'm saying it can get worse. We learned that lesson with the global pandemic when we were 17. I was very lucky to be working with a dedicated group of board members and staff that were ready to activate our emergency response plan 1 month before COVID hit Ghana. We had already provided our staff with all the necessary tools, all our systems were already on the cloud, and our teachers were practicing online teaching and using Google Classroom before schools were even asked to close here in Ghana. When schools closed on Friday, we were completely online just 2 days after on Monday. Our experience has taught us a lot. We understand better how to be ready for all eventuality, how to do better risk management, and how to always depend on the relationships we have built with our community for support and comfort. So when we have such a community, the ARIS community, all we can say is bring it on. Lesson number 5, and that's in orange, yellow, a color that signifies hope for me. We are more resilient than we think. Yes, we are. Being resilient does not mean that we do not experience stress and suffering. Demonstrating resilience is usually all about working through challenges, emotional pain, and physical suffering. As we head into our 20s, we are more confident as an institution that we are growing the necessary skill set that we need to survive. Building resilience takes time and strength, and it also requires the help of our community and the people around us. So we're very lucky to have that kind of community. As we look into the future, we are very excited about the coming 10 years. Though, it's been a heavy 3 years, but really, and I think a lot of what Homa is going to talk about is what should make us very excited about what's to come and how we should face it as a community. It's quite possible that we'll hit the crisis when we're close to our 30s, but as they say, 30s are the new 20s, so I think we'll enjoy that stage also. 4 years ago, in this same ballroom, for a big gala dinner, I presented the Vision 2025, the ARIS Vision 2025. I also asked our community for support to build our new primary block. Today, I stand tall and proud because we have delivered on our promises. We have completed the building and achieved our vision for personalized learning, well-being, education technology, and staff development, despite facing a once-in-a-century calamity. And now we are ready for our next strategic plan. But we need you and we need all of us to come together to decide what comes next. Our focus has always been and will always be our students. We have a huge responsibility towards them and many challenges ahead of us. But together, we can define our next priorities and design the future. And this is the theme of our 20th anniversary. This is the theme of the whole year, designing our future together. The future that we want to see for ourselves and our children. So we did not only complete the primary new block, but also are now, we just started a new secondary block with 10 classrooms and workshops, solar panel ready, with a huge multi-purpose hall, and inclusive. It's going to be a completely inclusive building that is connected to our Block A. We have also started our journey to become a sustainable school because all our structure, this is also the 3 multi-purpose court, and they're solar panel ready. So we have started our journey to becoming a sustainable and energy efficient school. We're using solar energy. There are 2 final projects. I don't know if you can see them here. So the yellow at the top is the future building that will finish in 1 year. The courts at the bottom are those we just finished. There's 2 final ones, which is the final secondary block, which will only be based on hubs and creative learning, and our gymnasium, sports complex, including our semi-Olympic pool. So these are the 2 remaining projects that we want to do. We set our priorities and use the Capital Levy Fund and donation to complete our projects. As we think of our future and the future of education in Africa and the world, I would also like to ask you to support the school's development plans to ensure that we complete our facilities in the fastest and most efficient way possible for our students. And that's why I ask you to pledge. Once again, I wish to wish you all a happy 20th anniversary, knowing that our 20s are not going to be easier. We'll be faced with many new challenges, and I think Homa will share a lot about that. But as long as we keep our focus on our students, remain grounded in the past and the present, all the lessons we've learned from the past, and really grounded in our present, with our sharp and inquisitive eagle eyes faced and channeled to the future, we will be okay. Or as we say here, we go there. ARIS, we there. Thank you. So in the end, please allow me to introduce the next speaker, a person that is very dear to my heart. A person who took a very big risk with me when he hired me 13 years ago. He has been on the ARIS board for more than 15 years, 10 of them as chairman. He is Mr. Nuhal Kalmoni, a third-generation Kalmoni, born in Ghana and educated in Canada. He joined the Japan Motors Company Group as a member of the Kalmoni Group Board of Directors, and was responsible for building the Mercedes-Benz business in Ghana in the 1990s. He is currently serving as the Group Executive Director with responsibility for sales and marketing for all the brands across West Africa. Nuhal, the floor is yours.
This is the pledge card. President of GSAR, Mr. Hazem Shalabi, ARIS School Director, Dr. Fatma, ARIS Senior Management Team, fellow students, our special guest from the Big Questions Institute, Homa Tavangar, honored guests, ladies and gentlemen, members of the ARIS community, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It seems like only yesterday we were here to celebrate ARIS's 15th anniversary. And here we celebrate its emergence into adulthood, as Doctor said, 20 years in the making. Your contributions in cash or in kind over the years have seen the school grow into what it is today. And we are here again to continue our journey together into the future of education at ARIS and in Ghana. As Doctor said, I've spent about 15 out of these 20 years with the ARIS board in various capacities. And knowing that it takes only 13 years to graduate from high school, it means I must have failed or repeated 2 classes. But since failure is a success, according to Cosmo, it means I'm on the right track. So I want to say that it has been an honor and a privilege to be part of this extraordinary journey, where we started with a simple nursery class and then added 1 class every year until we are today where we are as a full IB continuum school, like she said, offering all 4 programs and being the only school in Africa to do so. Our first batch of graduates are now young adults working in Ghana and overseas, and we are proud to have them as alumni as they help us navigate the world and to coach and guide the future generations of ARIS Eagles that are sitting behind us over there. And although your financial contributions have helped us to build the physical infrastructure that we have today and the infrastructure that we will need in the future, what I want to dwell upon tonight and pay particular thanks and homage to is the number of volunteers in the community that have literally stood behind the society, the vision of GISAR and ARIS, and have given their time and commitment in support of the school over the last 20+ years. It is in line with GISAR's motto, which is found in the Quran in Surah Al-Tawbah, in verse 105, وَقُلْ اعْمَلُوا فَسَيَرَى اللَّهُ بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وَقُلْ اعْمَلُوا فَسَيَرَى اللَّهُ عَمَلَكُمْ وَرَسُولَهُ وَالْمُؤْمِنُونَ. Tell them, O Prophet, do as you will. Your deeds will be observed by Allah, His Messenger, and the believers. And you will be returned to the knower of the seen and unseen, then he will inform you of what you used to do. It suffices to say that no good deed goes unseen and no good deed goes unrewarded. Your sacrifice and the time you gave away, and the time you gave away from your families and friends, inshallah, will be rewarded 100 or 1,000-fold. You should be very proud of your sacrifice, and we will forever be grateful for that. As the school reaches adulthood, as some of us are reaching adulthood, some of us are also in the middle of our careers, pushing hard with unrelenting passion and dedication. It's only natural that some of us are also becoming senior citizens. And since I fall into the latter category, I would like to announce that it's time for me to move on as board chairman of ARIS and to hand over the baton. Taking the helm starting Monday, September 4th, at exactly 9 a.m. will be Mr. Hazem Shalabi. Hazem has been with the board for several years. He's very well versed with what's happening at ARIS. And I would just want to say to Hazem, you have a great team at ARIS. You have very strong support from the community. And you have an unwavering army of volunteers that believe in the school's vision, mission, and objectives. With your, sorry. With your guidance and leadership, I'm sure that ARIS will continue soaring into even greater heights in the years ahead. I also want to thank my wife, Sama, for making our home the second ARIS board meeting office over the years. Finally, I would like to conclude by saying a big thank you to each and every one of you here today. This has been a great journey and an honor to me. Jazakumullah khair. May Allah reward you all, bless you and your families and your loved ones. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce you to a remarkable individual who's making a profound impact through creative inquiry, equity, and cultural competence. I don't know her much. I only met her yesterday. But I spent a little bit of time doing a little research about her. And I'm going to introduce you to her. So give me some time, okay? She has 3 decades of leadership in global competitiveness, innovation, equity, and education. Homa has emerged as a trusted voice at the intersection of equity and innovation. Her journey began by co-creating the first country strategies through a gender lens for the World Bank in the 80s, and it has evolved to guide schools and leaders through inclusive, anti-racist strategic growth, particularly during the challenges of the pandemic. She's not only an accomplished author with a best-selling book, Growing Up Global, but also a sought-after expert, a leadership coach, an advisor, and trainer for educational institutions and companies worldwide. Her passion is evident in her co-founding roles at the Oneness Lab, where she helps organizations transcend the superficial aspects of diversity, and the Big Questions Institute, where she leads initiatives to foster fearless inquiry and design the future, which is what we are about. Her work is centered around building cultural, racial, and global competence across diverse cultural landscapes, and she believes that we stand at a collective turning point where we must reimagine our institutions, starting with those that serve our children. In a world facing challenges like systemic racism, extreme poverty, health and educational disparities, gender violence, and climate change, we believe that Homa's vision and expertise shines as guiding lights. She reminds us that by embracing fearless inquiry, purpose, and service beyond ourselves, we can collectively create a better world. A visionary leader who is inspiring us to think differently, act with intention, and build a more inclusive and equitable future for all. Please welcome Oma Tavengar.
Thank you for that very kind introduction. And I have to say, I am also a very emotional person, so I'm really touched by the way this evening has begun. And I have only been in Ghana. I'm based in the United States, and I've only been in Ghana a few days. And just getting to meet so many of you yesterday, I was with the faculty. Today we had a board and leadership meeting, and tonight getting to be with many of you who are parents is truly a wonderful way to get to know the community. And I have to tell you that in the work that we do, especially with the Big Questions Institute, we have the honor, the privilege, the responsibility of working with many schools around the world. So I just was in Dakar a few days ago. I'm going to be in Laos and Colombia, South America, in a couple weeks. And I am not exaggerating when I tell you that I truly believe that the work that you're doing here at ARIS, that your leadership through Dr. Fatma is outstanding in the world. And so you have a lot to be proud of, and I'm very excited about the future, and I'm very excited that we are working with you to think about the future. So I want to talk about both looking back a little bit as well as looking forward. I brought with me a couple of my publications. I have a few more, but I share these especially because I started working on this book, Growing Up Global, about 20 years ago, and have learned a lot. I started this work, and I told the leadership team today, the work that I'm doing now is probably my 5th career. I started working in international development and then in globalization and economic development. And as I was working with a lot of businesses to understand globalization, what I realized is that we were working with adults to understand the world. And in many cases, it was too late. We really needed to start with our children. And so after 9/11 and thinking about how so many doors were closing and so much fear and othering of people who may not look or live like me was happening, particularly in the United States, I was concerned for my own children, and I have 3 children, all in their 20s, all in that special decade of their 20s, who I didn't want them to fear the world. I wanted them to embrace the world. So I set out sort of on a personal quest that turned into this book. And as I mentioned to the leadership team, I had this incredible, strange, coincidental opportunity that I was riding on a train from Philadelphia to New York. It's just under 2-hour train ride. The train was absolutely packed, and there was 1 seat left. Well, there were 2 seats left. I took one, and there was 1 seat facing me left. And in that seat facing me sat Dr. Jane Goodall. And she, if you recognize her and her work, she's a legend. And she really encouraged this book. She said, we need to raise our children to be citizens of the world in a much more expansive way. And so that's just a little bit of the journey of how I got here and started working with schools and thinking about the work that we do in the context of the wider world. I also want to notice that I love ARIS so much that my dress coincidentally is exactly your school colors. I couldn't have planned that. So now I want to look back and I want to tell you a story. This focuses on one girl who was growing up around the 19-teens, actually exactly the time of the last pandemic, the last global pandemic. And this girl was from a very small village in the Middle East. She came from a place where if a girl's eye caught a man's eye, she could lose her honor, where girls never went to school, and where you met your husband on your wedding day. And this girl was a little rebellious, and she didn't get married until later than many of the girls in her community. So she was about 15 when she got married. And on her wedding day, that day that she met her husband, she was actually quite happy because he seemed very kind. As they say, he was easy on the eyes. So she thought, this is as good as it gets. And so they start their life and things are going pretty well. And one day, her husband, who would travel a little bit outside of their village for his trade, came back and he asked for a meeting with her parents where they lived in their home. And he said that, I've learned something that I want to start with our family. I want my wife to learn how to read. And her family was completely scandalized by this. No girl had read. What strange thing would happen if this happens to her? And so they actually kicked him out of the home. They kicked him out of the family, and they wanted her to annul the marriage. And this was truly scandalous, what he was suggesting. And for the first time in her life, she rebelled against her parents and joined her husband. And this was very risky to do because she didn't know anything outside of their home. And it happened that she was also expecting their first child. So to her great fear and risk, she had this child who her parents said, if you have the child of someone with these crazy ideas, who knows what can happen? Who knows if this child will be born as a regular human being or have horns or, they really believed this. But she went ahead and had the child. And the child was born as a very healthy girl who actually grew up to be a very prominent educator in Iran in the 20th century. And this couple, the young married couple, are my grandparents. And my father is their youngest child. And in 20 years, if we want to keep thinking about what can you do in 20 years, that little girl grew up and she became a teacher by the time she was 20. And then she grew in her reputation. And in a little over 20 years, you have a new generation 20 years later. These are some of the places where their children and their grandchildren went on to learn, to lead. Every one of these logos, from Apple to TED to Oxford to Harvard, is a story in the family. And it's interesting because I imagine that many of you have transformational stories in your family, but maybe it's just like normal we had this story in our family, but we never really stopped to think about how powerful and courageous it was. And I'm going to get back to that. But one of the reasons I share this story with you is not because I want to say we are very special, but that I truly believe we are living in a moment in the world that we could say is a transformative time, where I'm okay, on my watch, I have computing power that would be unimaginable. I have the computing power of the world that would fit in the palm of my hand or on my wrist. That's unbelievable, right? Or this experience of COVID that we've just gone through, it was horrible and tragic. It also demonstrated how connected we were as a planet, how we all had to shut down at the exact same time, and we have this shared experience as a result. The unbelievable explosion of artificial intelligence. 6 months ago, we couldn't have imagined the impact it would have on students today, and it's being predicted that by the end of this school year, the impact it will have on schools and on students, once again, is unimaginable to us today. That another element of the transformative times in which we live that I find extremely inspiring is the power of young people. That Malala won a Nobel Peace Prize before she turned 20. She was a child. That around the world, students are creating things like robotic limbs, artificial limbs, to help others live a full life, and they're doing this in their classroom. So I think we could probably, each one of us, think of something that's happening today that is truly transformative. It's unbelievable, some of the possibilities that we have. And so if we think about what are some of the lessons from just even my little family story that can illuminate the present, what might they be? And being here in Ghana, I have to think how this really is an experience of Sankofa, that we are looking back to illuminate the present. And so what I learned from their story is that it takes courage to experience transformation. You can't expect a return to go back to normal. And that's one of the lessons from COVID. We don't want to go back to the normals that got us here in the first place. So this is an opportunity for something new. That our curiosities can help us to find our passion. Our passion is what can help us to make a difference. But it starts with, what do we care about? What are we curious about? That we need to embrace new mindsets, ways of thinking that perhaps had never occurred to us before and are likely very different from what we grew up with. That we need to practice coherence. So what does that mean? Is what you care about the way that you live and the way that you operate? Sort of like, are your insides matching your outsides? And we're going to work on all of this at ARIS, looking to the future. And finally, we have to exercise imagination. We need to build a world that none of us have ever experienced. And that is ultimately the goal that we hope education can help us advance. So we are here to dream and to build something the world has never seen. It's very ambitious. So the truth is, we don't only live in transformative times, but we also live in a liminal time. Liminal means that space in between. So it's said that we are living, and anthropologists, historians, organizational developers, all kinds of fields talk about this moment in time is a liminal time. It's a time in between stories. It's a time in between institutions that things feel like they're sort of breaking between us. And societies tend to focus on this story of transformation is a story from, we all are familiar with going from a caterpillar, the ugly caterpillar, to the beautiful butterfly. That beautiful butterfly represents the transformation. But there's a story in the middle that we often miss. And that's sort of where we've been. It was really dramatic in COVID when we had to stay inside and be confined, and it drove some of us crazy. And that's a little bit of what it's like to be in that in-between moment, that chrysalis, where you're stuck inside, you're in between these two realities, you're growing and changing sort of like beyond the capacity of what you can take. Your elbows are a little sharper, and it's not pretty. This is not the pretty part of the story. It's messy. It's ugly. And there's some very interesting research about the cocoon, the chrysalis, that it's found that in the cocoon, this insect actually carries memory with it, and that carries forward into what will become the butterfly. So we're living in a transformative time, but we're not quite all there yet. We're also living in this time between stories. In some ways, it looks like this, and it feels like this. We would like to say that we send our children to school. It's a nice, contained bubble, and that, you do school the old way. There is one correct answer. You go from A to B, and it's a straight line, and those are the rules, and that's how you get a good grade. But the reality is, at a younger and younger age, our children are looking out to the world, whether they're seeing the world through TikTok or Instagram or their friends, and they're opening the door and they're seeing it's actually pretty messy out there. Or they just look outside the window. They look around. It's messy. And they're very concerned about this. So this is probably more of a reality of what our children are living through. That we're living through what is called a VUCA time. That our world right now is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And many of us are only realizing this now, and even to realize it now is a privilege, because I think the majority of people in the world have always been through a VUCA time, right? So I'm not going to go down, often I list, there are all these challenges that are the reality of what our children are inheriting. And so we have felt that rather than sort of fear this present and future or avoid it, that we need to kind of lean into it. And we face it with something that at the Big Questions Institute, I know we're not the only ones, but we have latched on to this idea of fearless inquiry. So that's one reason we're called the Big Questions Institute and not the Big Answers Institute, because I don't know anyone who has the answers, but we're willing to ask the questions, and we'll ask the questions together. And by the way, there will be time for questions after this as well. So we wrote a book during COVID called The 9 Big Questions That Schools Must Answer to Avoid Going Back to Normal, because normal wasn't that great to begin with. Normal is what got us here. And we make this book available as a free download, so educators and parents and anyone who's interested, students, I highly encourage the students, you can go on our website and download this book for free. So we're giving this book away, and we're hoping it sparks discussion and fearless inquiry. So our very first question in this list of questions we're very deliberate about is, what is sacred? Because that begins a conversation to then think about, what do we mean when we talk about learning? Where is the power? Why do we do fill in the blank? Why are we doing this in school? I bet students ask all the time, why do we have to do this, right? And so we think it's important to ask those questions. If there isn't an answer, that tells me something, right? So anyway, all of these questions, who is unheard? Who should be at the table? Who is not at the table? Maybe we need to build a new table altogether. So we have been asking these questions, and I believe that your chairs have a little piece of paper with a QR code, or just take a picture of this QR code. But if you don't, please, and students also, if you have a phone with you, I'm going to bet you have a phone with you, please take a picture of this and answer this question. What is sacred about Al Rayyan International School? And what we mean by that, it's not a sort of religious sacred, but what do you hope remains? If you were to return to the school in 20 years, in 40 years from now, what would you hope to see is present? Or what matters the most to you now and into the future? So if you share your thoughts of what you think is most sacred, and I really want to see you have your phones out. I want to see everybody, please put your thoughts down. And if you don't have a phone to put out a QR, to open the QR code, you can tell the person next to you. You just double click. This is going to open a Padlet, and you can double click on your screen, or you see a little plus sign, a circle with a plus sign, and just put down any thoughts that you have. What matters most about the experience of going to this school? And what would you hope to see if you come back, maybe for your grandchildren by that time, right? So let's take about another minute, and I am going to... I did it. Okay. So you see the responses are coming up. It's always very exciting when the Padlet starts to populate. And if you are a parent and you have not put an answer down yet, first of all, don't feel pressure by this. Think about your own response first, and then put something down, okay? I urge you to do that. Be honest about what you think matters the most. And what happens as you're putting these responses to what is sacred, what matters the most, a picture starts to emerge. And it's a very unique picture for your community. And I think every one of these posts is a data point. And when we want to plan for the future, it will be very important to look at this. We asked the faculty and staff this question, the leadership this question. So we're collecting data with you right now. Thank you. You thought you weren't going to have to do any work, but we're putting you to work. So this is absolutely fascinating. What do you notice? Yeah, other than Madame Dana, congratulations. What do you notice? I would say also, I would avoid making it personal. I would avoid the individual names, even though I know you love them. Okay, the responses are really coming in. Okay, so when you look at this, what do you notice is emerging? What is the picture? Is there a theme that is coming out? Can somebody maybe raise your hand, because I can't hear you very well. Relevant education. Freedom of expression, open-mindedness, open door policy, trust, safe space, passion, acceptance of everyone, open to change, inclusion, kindness and empathy, relationship, community, family-like relationship. Okay? So a few people have heard this 3 times. And this is very interesting because everybody says the same thing. Everybody says the same thing. What do you notice is not here? That you think, when you think of school, what do you think of? Huh? Curriculum. But this all is education. This becomes education, right? What else? Restrictions, exams, results. What else? Students, what do you not see here that you're so used to? Competition, homework, stress. This is fascinating. I didn't make this up. You put this down. I did not lead the witness. Okay. But it's amazing and trustworthy staff. Everything you've shared, I think, is truly human. You have gone to the human side of school. Everybody gravitates to this. And I will admit, we ask this question all over the world. We've asked this at the top prep schools that are feeder schools to the Ivy League. We've asked this in every continent. And everybody says this. Everybody wants this. And yet we have this gap between what we say we want, what is sacred, what matters the most, and what many schools are doing. And that, to me, is an example of how we're living in this liminal time. Because we're in between what we believe and what we're doing. So that just gives us a little bit of a shared starting point. And, you know, I was really moved by the fact that both the fact what you have stated in what is sacred, these are deeply human, as well as how emotional it is to talk about ARIS. I mean, we're talking about a building, we're talking about some ground with some people that go in it every day, and some people who have a job, and some people that have to go to school. But it's so much more than that, right? It has a soul, and that is heart. And this quote I find very moving, where Parker Palmer talks about heart. The actual word heart in Spanish and French, you know, it comes from the Latin core, like cœur, corazón. And that core points not merely to our emotions, but to the core of the self, that center place where all of our ways of knowing converge, come together. Intellectual, emotional, sensory, intuitive, imaginative, experiential, relational, and bodily, among others. The heart is where we integrate what we know in our minds with what we know in our bones. It's the place where our knowledge can become more fully human. Core is also the Latin root from which we get the word courage. So when all that we understand of self and world come together in the center place called the heart, we are more likely to find the courage to act humanely on what we know. So this is work of the heart. And if we think about this word core, I also think of like the core of a fruit, like an apple. And so you have 2 ways to get to the core. You can be decisive. You can cut through. It's a blunt object. It's a sharp object. Or you can just let the apple sit on the counter for weeks and weeks. Just let it happen. But by the time you can get to the middle of that apple, it is rotted and it is of no use anymore. So it does take some courage to get to the core for it to be fruitful. And then what lies at the core are those seeds that will seed the whole future. So, and you know, plant that orchard. So when we think, I want us to think about this word core, how important it is. Because as educators, and I think as parents, we have this false dichotomy where we talk about soft skills and hard skills. Hard skills, it's the math, the science, the engineering, the big high-paying jobs, right? That you got to do your math and your science. The soft skills are things like empathy, caring, sacrifice, love. Those we think of as soft. And so we created this, it's like soft skills become a second-class citizen. But truly, when you look to the analysis, everyone from Harvard Business Review to Davos World Economic Forum, what are the skills of the future? They're what we used to call soft skills. It's empathy, creativity, global mindedness, compassion. So let's think of those not as soft skills, but as core skills. And if we just make that sort of mental shift, that new mindset to go from a soft skill to a core skill, we really might think about what we offer our children in a very different way. So I was going to have you turn and talk to each other, maybe for a minute. Think about this, because I think this is important. What would change, especially parents and students, what would change in the way, in what you expected of your children if we focused on core skills? I'm not saying throw away the math and the science, but what if you learned math and science through a lens of empathy, through a lens of creativity and compassion and all of these human-centered skills? What would change if you thought of that? Actually, what I think we'll do, just think about that, and then we'll have time. I hope in the question and answer and in the cocktail, we'll talk to each other, because I don't want to keep you longer than is necessary. And it's not just me saying that. Your school is very familiar with the design thinking process. It doesn't start until you have empathy. Empathizing kicks off true design. This is the process that Steve Jobs used to make the iPod, to make the Apple computer. It started with empathy for the user experience. And now thousands of people go to Stanford University to get trained on this. At MIT, they said, if our education is only for the mind, we have failed. So then they transitioned and they said, we're an engineering school, so it should be mind and hand. And then a few years ago, they announced out of the office of the chancellor, our education is worthless if it is not of the mind, the hand, and the heart. These must go together. If we're going to stay ahead of the rest of the world, we must be cohesive in this way. And then finally, at Google, I think of Google as one of the most innovative companies in the world. Whether or not I like their policies or I agree with them doesn't matter. They spent 5 years, a huge study. They wanted to know, among the most innovative teams, what is the secret? What makes them really successful? Is it where they went to school? Where they went to university? Is it how good of a coder they are? Is it the guest lecturers that we bring in? Is it the fantastic cafeteria? If you ever have a chance to eat in the Google cafeteria, I highly recommend it. What is it about? Is it the pay? They pay a lot. What is it about the teams that are the most successful? Does anyone know what it was? Far above anything else that they had. Close to well-being. It's psychological safety. It's the ability to bring your whole self, to offer an idea that just seems so out there that nobody would have said before, and that the people around the table, they're not rolling their eyes, they're not talking over you, they're not ignoring you, they're not saying that's a terrible idea or we tried it last year. we are giving each other the space to create and generate. And that's how you get Gmail and skip this ad on YouTube and all of these innovations that I can't live without. But psychological safety is that most important starting point. I'm going to skip over a little bit of this, but we're going to be looking at these attributes of the new skills. And it isn't that we're saying that you throw away the skill sets that are needed, but mindsets and the skill sets work together. And the mindset is what gets the skill set stick. Because there's a lot of research that shows if you give the exam to the student, you gave the exam to them in May, you give the exam to them in September, nobody remembers what they studied for, very rarely. But if you're living it, if you're practicing it, if you are experiencing in a project, in something real that you care about, that is what's going to make the difference. And I think we ask ourselves, I may still wonder, what do I want to be when I grow up? But, how many of you have ever been asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? I expect everybody has been asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? Or we ask our children this, right? But what if we switch the question from, what do you want to be when you grow up, to, what problem do you want to solve? If you ask your child at age 5, 10, 15, what do you care about? What's the problem you want to solve? And your children start seeing themselves as problem solvers. At age 5, maybe it's, I'm really sad about that puppy in the street. Or I want to clean up those plastic bottles that I always see are on the side of the road. Or whatever it might be. You have a chance to grow in your passion, to grow in your curiosity. Earlier today, we talked about how much pressure it is when people ask you, what's your passion? What if you don't know? But what you can know is, what are you curious about? And if you begin at a young age, it's like a muscle. Like empathy is like a muscle. You start to build that muscle of problem solving. And it also takes away, Dr. Fatma talked about failure is part of the experience of being in your 20s. When you are asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? And let's say at age 6, you say, I want to be a doctor. All of your life is going to that track. You don't have a lot of room to experiment and fail and try something that's really different, out there, strange, creative, because you have to be a doctor. And so this question, you may end up being an amazing doctor, but you've had a chance to explore what else is it about yourself, the world, what do you care about? And so, I know you're very familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals, the global goals. They are, thank you. They are a wonderful framework for solving the problems to help us think about the future. But when we talk about the future, we are not going to be looking into a crystal ball, okay? It is, as Kevin Kelly said, futurists are really predicting the present. It turns out the present is actually very hard to see. Mostly the now is obscured by our deep assumptions and prejudices, which makes it very difficult to actually see what's going on. So a good futurist spends a lot of time trying to decipher the present and see it through the mask of whatever your biases might be in the present. So again, we're not going to be looking into a crystal ball, but we are going to be planning for the future and thinking about the future. So 65 years ago, this picture came out, and it's really interesting because when you look at what is in this push-button education, tomorrow's schools, it's not that different from what our kids are doing every day, right? And I don't know if you've seen this self-manned drone. It's called a Jetson, but this is for sale now, where you can fly over, you know, and the price is dropping, but they have one of those in the pictures. So that's really interesting. So 65 years ago, they were imagining today. And I wonder, as we think about the future, we think about our children and what they will be stepping into, what might we imagine 65 years from now? And I think it can feel a little scary to think about that. I want to protect my children, and that does feel scary. But there's a lot of research I'm not going to go into today that imagining the future and collectively imagining is actually very good for us. It helps build resilience. It helps build hope. Talking about this, having this conversation with others, it helps us think about things that maybe we don't want to go there. So we are going to be working with ARIS on a process to gain clarity on why do you even need a new plan? What is the point of that? What might it entail? And visioning the future and the pieces that you would start to put in place today. And we're really excited about getting started on this. So I'm going to close with this idea that in many ways, as educators are futurists. They may not see themselves as futurists, but their success depends on the success of your children, who are the future. And that our children, our students, truly are at this liminal time in the world when things are breaking around us. They are the builders, and they can be thought of as civilization builders. If you talk to your child and you see them as a civilization builder, that changes a lot. Then I'll ask my child, what problem do you want to solve? What do you care about? What matters to you? And this is a heavy quote that we're going to be using a lot in our work with the leadership and the guiding coalition. I'm going to just throw that word out there once to you. But this is a really influential educator, philosopher, who talks about the task of education today is to confront the almost unimaginable design challenge of building an educational system that provides for the recreation of civilization. Your children are civilization builders during a transition time all over the world. And this challenge brings us face to face with the importance of an education for humanity, not just an education for individual gain. So nobody put on what is sacred, grades, what college you got into, but so much of our focus is that education for individual, not an education for humanity. So we want to be thinking about, it's kind of yes and. That will benefit our children as it will also benefit the wider world. How do we do that? That's a yes and very abundant mindset. And what gives me hope in the present are young people. The heroes, I think many of the heroes today, they are youth. And I'm so glad so many of you are here in the room tonight. But they are doing things that you never could have imagined that they did. I won't go into all their stories, but there are so many stories, and they give me so much hope. And so I think I'll end with the girls in Iran, because it's a bit of a full circle, that they are showing so much courage, and that there is so much that we can have hope, even as things often don't feel very hopeful. So to think about this idea of hope as a discipline, it's a commitment to the future that must manifest action. So thank you so much. I really have hope in thanks to my time here, and looking forward with hope, empathy, imagination to build that future that none of us have ever lived. It's a very exciting time to be embarking on this. So thank you so much for having me. And I really love that we have students here. I really love that students are also here. Thank you. So do we have just a little bit of time? We got started a little bit later, so if there are a few questions, if anybody wants to ask anything, and then I think we'll close for the cocktail.
Good evening. Thank you so much for a very insightful presentation. It's been really, really a lot of food for thought. Very excited. One of the things you mentioned stayed with me, and I'd like to expand on it a little bit. You were talking about approaching things like science and more technical subjects, maths, with perhaps an approach to perhaps empathy. You were looking at a different way in which to approach these more technical subjects.
Yes.
And that kind of thought, it kind of drove me to think about how previously when we saw trees, we just saw trees. And there's a lot of research done into the symbiotic relationships between trees, and there's a whole life going on. And I wonder if you can throw light on what we can even glean from perhaps issues to do with empathy or symbiosis when it comes to things like maths and science and teaching more with that approach. I'd like you to just, that's why quite fascinating. Thank you.
Oh, I love that question. Thank you. Well, I think there are many ways to approach that question. One that comes to mind that is very top of mind for me is, I don't know if you've heard of, there are various books on this topic. One is called Algorithms of Oppression. Another one is called Race After Technology. And what happens when you don't have empathy and when you have no diversity among the people who are creating, let's say, Google Maps or a search engine? You end up having incredibly biased results. And you can look for some of the TED Talks or the summaries of like the algorithms of oppression. You have let's be honest, a white male, certain profile of person who is the predominant coder in the technology company. And the biases that are usually, they're not intended biases, but they only grow as the program grows. So you're not starting with empathy. You're not starting with a diversity of voices. You're not starting with a lot of these core skills. You only have people who have been coding their entire life. And they may have been the ones who got the best score on a test, but they didn't have the interpersonal relationship. And so what ends up happening is we have these incredibly biased algorithms. And that's a huge area of scholarship. So it's very real in math and science and technology. What happens when you lose that human element, if that makes sense. And one of the points that we're talking with the leadership is about not only these core skills, but building new literacies. So there is digital literacy, but what about also literacies like eco-literacy? So when you talk about a symbiotic relationship, can I name the trees in my environment, the birds, the insects? And if I can't, and they all look the same to me, what is the implication of my distancing myself from my environment? We did an experiment that we asked students to name 10 major brands: Nike, Apple, Google, Amazon, Samsung, all these different brands, Chanel. Quickly, they could name all of those. Then we showed 10 leaves of trees that are in the immediate surrounding. Maybe they could name one. Maybe. So we're not in relationship. Being in relationship with our environment, without that, we're losing something.
This is not a question related to your presentation, but you mentioned something about how when you're younger and they're always asking you, what do you want to be when you grow up? And so this is a personal question towards you. I wanted to ask you, what did you want to be when you were younger? And if you imagined you'd be who you are today?
Thank you. Honestly, I had no idea. And I wasn't even interested in education. But I mentioned in the beginning, this is like my 4th or 5th career. And I think there is something about these times, and maybe this is part of a liminal time, where you are changing so much. The job market is changing so much. My career changed because of my family. As I had children, I needed to sort of reinvent what I did and adjust. And so, I do think one thing that I was good at is following my curiosity. I think that is one, but I wasn't really clear on what I wanted to do. But I was flexible enough. And I do have to say that my parents were really open to myself, my sister, and my brother sort of following. It's hilarious because none of us are medical doctors. And my father, he always thought one of my children would be a doctor. And he is a PhD. He's not a doctor. His career was actually also pretty creative. He's one of those people on that list. But I think we had a chance to follow our curiosity and to unfold it from there, and to have a safe space with our family to talk about what we were interested in. And if I wanted to switch careers, it wouldn't be a disaster. So I think having that freedom, it's like a freedom to learn, really was very important in my foundation. Also, we were raised that girls, boys, you would have an equal opportunity. So I think that made a very big difference as well. Thank you for that question.
Thank you. Merci.
What is the one advice to give to students graduating? I mean, it sounds redundant, but I think this idea of following your curiosity, trying to be somewhere that you have psychological safety. I think that when, we're very concerned about our students' happiness, and we know that we are happier when we are not just serving ourselves. The science of happiness says people are happier when they are doing work that has meaning and a purpose. So often that means I am doing work that is also of some sort of broader service. And it can serve in many different ways, but that I have some meaning and purpose to what I am doing. So be exploring that. Don't wait until you graduate to do that. Start that now and think about, what problem do you want to solve? Yeah, I think that's what I would say.
Hi. Thank you for such an insightful presentation. It really got me thinking about so much. Our son is just turned 3 and just starting his journey of education at ARIS, so it's been a big journey getting us here, and it's gotten me thinking a lot about what education means for us as a family, how I want to approach education for my son, and going deep into that research about the current state of education and what we imagine for him. So we're so excited to be at ARIS. I really loved the notion you brought forward, children being or civilization builders, I think is what you referred it to. And I think that's really a revolutionary idea, because I think so often what I see in the educational system is a system that's designed to program kids for a civilization that we've created, or even our parents or generations have created, that is really imperfect in a lot of ways, and it will always be that way. But not allowing children to set the vision for us as humanity. It's so often given to them, this is the way the world is, this is what we've created, and here's how you are going to fit into that system, and we're going to train you how to do that.
Yeah.
So I would love to hear from you what you're seeing and how you believe schools can be a place where we are passing the baton on earlier and allowing them to determine the course of our future versus handing them a future and fitting them into that mold.
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge, it's such an interesting challenge. I think, I think we have to look at things holistically for our children. So it's not just academic or, people bring a 2-year-old in and they say, okay, tell me what kind of college my child is going to get into if they go to this school. We just heard that example today. And so if an education is also kind of, it's more human and it's more humane. So character, I think one of the most important elements of an education is the character of a child who comes out. And I do think as much as we want to center children and listen to children, I also think an element like with empathy comes true care for others. And, you're able to do work that's hard. You're able to do, you're building these virtues. Maybe it is sacrifice. Maybe it is hard work. And you are involved in a process. I love thinking about like metacognition. So thinking about what you're going to think about, talking about why we're doing this. So I would like you to help us set the table for dinner tonight because we're going to all eat together and we can all enjoy it. You might say to your 3 or 5-year-old, so they understand, why are we doing this? Instead of just, you have to do this, you have to follow this script, but we are having a respectful conversation with our children about why we do certain things. It takes a little more time and effort, but I think they will then sort of be, kind of, in a way, partners with us. I'm not saying you take away the role of being the parent and the authority. Like, I still believe that is very important. At the same time, are we listening to our children? Are we learning from, it's that symbiotic relationship like with nature that we need. We also need it with our children. So I think it is a much more like holistic and systemic approach that we need to begin and we need to think through more with our children. So thank you so much. I think that we should move on.
Thank you, Homa. So we'd like to say a big thank you to all of you who came tonight. That alone is enough. But as you know, this event is a fundraiser, and we have our lovely student volunteers here who will be approaching you tonight. So we encourage you to pledge soon so that you can enjoy the rest of your evening. We really do appreciate your time and your presence. As you enjoy the rest of your evening, please bear in mind the words of Mandy Hale, that there's nothing more beautiful than someone who goes out of their way to make life beautiful for others. Thank you so much for being beautiful people. So we'd like to invite you to head on up to the tall tables to my right and enjoy yourselves this evening.